Welcome to Frontline Dispatches, an organizing upgrade, a show dedicated to spotlighting the most urgent left organizing and activism happening around the country and beyond for racial and economic justice and much more. Stay tuned for future episodes every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. My name is Diana Robinson, and I'll be your host today. Today, we will hear from John R. Taylor III, representing the Black Male Initiative of Georgia. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, make sure to leave comments and chats, as well as make sure that you like and follow our YouTube pages and subscribe to our Facebook as well. We're going to be checking the chats and the comments as we go along, so make sure to add any questions you might have. And finally, to stay up to speed with all the amazing content coming out of Organizing Upgrade, sign up on our website to hear about upcoming events, videos, articles about left strategy for organizers. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome, John. When we first spoke, the idea was that we would be talking about the Georgia runoff Senate elections and the efforts to win those 2 Senate seats in Georgia. But as we're speaking right now, we have right-wing fascists who have violently occupied the Capitol building. So initially, what are your thoughts about what is unfolding, and how does this relate to the outcomes of the Georgia election that happened yesterday?
So, first of all, thanks for having me, Diana. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. To your question, I think the election results here in Georgia are directly correlated, and not just the runoff election results, but the results from November. As a matter of fact, all of the organizing that has been happening to build to this point is directly correlated to the response that we're seeing from the Proud Boys and others. I think folks are really upset about the fact that they're not getting their way. And rather than finding a positive outlet to resolve the conflict, like they constantly urge us to do, they have taken the streets, and they have taken to property destruction, and they have taken to acts of terror and threats of violence against individuals that are established as our leadership. And I think there's a real question there about why it's okay for white men and white structures to attack our institutions while constantly telling people of color, Black men and Black women, that we should follow the rules and accept the status quo. So it's very telling that the behavior is happening, but it's not at all unexpected, unfortunately.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion about what this would look like, and what this would come up to. A lot of it seems reactionary to the shifts in power, not, like you said, not only the Senate runoff or the presidential election, but the shifts in power that have been happening of more women and people of color being elected into positions of power within our electorate. So, there is this saying that so goes the South, so goes the nation, right? Everyone hears that often. The last time that Georgia delivered a Democratic presidential president was in 1992. And I believe Senator-elect Runoff is the first Black senator in history of the state. Can you tell us more about, what work went into building this movement and what strategy? I know this was a long-term project that it didn't just happen. So can you tell us more about what led to this, what work led to these victories of this historic election and, just delivering both these Senate seats?
Absolutely. So we should start by saying there has been a tremendous effort led by Black and brown folks all across the South and in some ways globally to lift up the work happening here in Georgia. And it didn't start in 2020. Quite frankly, it didn't start in 2018. It is multi-decade, multi-generational, entrenched, racially motivated work that is focused on trying to build our communities and make substantive change. Individuals like Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, Dr. Joseph Lowry, Reverend James Orange, Dorothy Height, all of whom were brilliant, Dr. Height, all of whom were brilliant leaders, educators, activists, and organizers, Asa Philip Randolph. did a tremendous amount of work on the ground. Our veterans from SCLC, our ancestors that have done work from the first folks that escaped slavery in the swamps in South Florida and South Georgia to the brothers and sisters that stood on street corners for months upon months, knocking on over 10 million doors during this election cycle. We have put in tireless effort. And so I say this all to say there's no magical moment that occurred yesterday nor in November. This was tireless work and effort. And I am thankful to say that I was able to serve and work with some of those tremendous individuals and leaders. In this contemporary era, we're talking about the LaTosha Browns and the Cliff Albrights from Black Voters Matter. We're talking about folks like Nse Ufo from New Georgia Project. Of course, we're talking about our leader, Stacey Abrams. But we're also talking about our leader, Ms. Helen Butler, who has been driving voter education, voter empowerment work through the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda for over a decade now. That's Dr. Lowry's organization. We're talking about a grassroots movement that not only mobilized folks in times of need, but has provided sustenance and structure so that we could get to this moment and survive. Because Lord knows, Black folks have been through way too much for way too long. And the idea that we were able to make it this far and turn Georgia blue is indicative of the tireless effort that folks have put in. It's just a tremendous list. I couldn't even name everyone, but it's an amazing list of folks.
Yeah, thank you, John, for that perspective and that context, which I think is really important because, oftentimes when folks aren't part of that organizing, that movement building, it's easy to think like how things just happen easily or how, people are uplifted as the ones creating it, but it's like so much work that lays the groundwork to get to a moment of victory. So I just want to remind our viewers that you can post your questions in the chat or comments on Facebook, and we're going to be monitoring that throughout the show. So please feel free to add your questions and comments. So what does this mean for politics in Georgia? What does this mean for the Senate? What does it mean for the country as a whole? The winning of these two Senate seats.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is for the nation as a whole, these two Senate seats do exactly what everyone's been talking about. They give our Vice President-elect Kamala Harris the ability to make a tie-breaking vote on decisions that come out of the Senate in situations where there's a tie. And now, because of the 48 Democratic seats, the 2 independent seats that caucus with the Democrats, and the 50 Republican seats, we have what could be considered a deadlock and a tie scenario. So it gives power to our executive branch to make decisions for what's in the best interest of our people. And I think our conservative counterparts are very concerned because they feel like the decisions that will be made will benefit progressive ideology and campaign structure. And what I urge folks to understand is that at the end of the day, our political system is fairly moderate. It's not extremely radical. It does not serve the interests of our people on the streets on a day-to-day basis. So I'm less concerned about that. I'm actually more concerned that it will not go far enough and that it will not challenge the status quo. And that unfortunately, the conditions for far too many Black and brown men and women on the ground, for their children and their families, will not be substantively changed over the next few years. Because quite frankly, while we may have won those 2 Senate seats here in Georgia, and while we may have elected Joe Biden as president, what we did not do was pick up a majority in the House or the Senate in the state for us. And so that means the next 2 years for us is going to be very difficult. What we did not do was change the Public Service Commission. And so that means that, utility bills and moratoriums on utility bills during the pandemic are ending, and they're not going to be reinstated. And so the crises of survival for so many Black folks on the ground is still very much so a problem that we have to address. But it is a tremendous victory that we've been able to turn Georgia, as they say, blue, as we say, more progressive, and put together a platform that allowed folks with common sense ideas about making material changes for the lives of everyday residents in this country and in this state a reality.
Mhm.
Perhaps we'll get a stimulus package that actually supports essential workers and working families. That would be pretty awesome.
Yeah, so you make a really good point about, that there's still so much accountability. There's still so much more struggle. There's still so much more pushing and holding people accountable to create the changes and to have the progressiveness that we want to see. You touched upon this a little bit, talking about Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. Throughout all these elections and on various elections, we constantly hear follow the lead of Black women. Black women constantly are delivering the vote. That Black women are leading the way for unprecedented voter turnout. Can you tell us why you were part of a founding or why you're part of the Black Male Initiative and how that relates to these efforts, like why it's important to kind of name and center Black leadership, both of women and men?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's most interesting, I think that's a great question. One of the things that's most interesting about how we think our current political structure works is that in this moment, folks are lifting up the leadership struggle, the wonderful effort, the tremendous work of Black women. And we support that. We love our sisters, and that's the first and most important thing. We support the leadership of Black women. I am happy to follow Black women leaders like Nikema Williams, like Stacey Abrams, like Felicia Davis, like Nse Ufo, and Helen Butler, all about it. But oftentimes, when you lift up the leadership of Black women, it becomes a backhanded, compliment or an attack on Black men. I often hear things like we drug the brothers along, or Black men aren't showing up and aren't voting. You got to go out and get the Black men. Where are they at? Well, this election cycle is a perfect example. There are approximately 320,000 Black men in the state of Georgia that are registered voters, but they haven't turned out to vote since maybe 2008. The system calls them infrequent or low propensity voters. We call those individuals low investment voters because the dollars are not being spent traditionally to turn out Black men because they represent a core base to the Progressive Democratic Party. The reality is that Black men outvote every other demographic with the exception of Black women. So the narrative that Black men are disengaged or don't vote or don't participate is ridiculous. The truth of the matter is, most of the messaging misses us completely and is tone deaf to our needs. And so, if someone spoke to you in a language that you didn't understand, would you engage and respond? Would you even know how to? The obvious answer is no. And so what we're doing with Black Male Initiative Georgia and why it was so critical to create these organizations is because we need to have a conversation with Black men about what's important to Black men and to have a response that is shaped, a narrative that is created by Black men, and that more importantly lifts up the positive attributes and work that these brothers are doing. And that emphatically says we are not in competition with our sisters. We love our sisters. We are proud of our sisters. We respect our sisters. We are bonded to Black men, Black women. But we want folks to understand that Black men are critical thinkers, that we do care about our conditions. We do care about what's happening in the world. And we're not willing to sit on the sidelines, but we're also not willing to be told what to do and how to do it. We can think for ourselves.
Thanks, John, for that context and perspective. Always important to reiterate, reemphasize, that those impacted should be leading. And I think this speaks exactly to that, right? So in thinking about, you spoke a little bit about this earlier in the conversation around kind of the work that's been happening in the South. So what are some of the, how are the efforts in Georgia related to progressive regional efforts across the South to kind of build progressive movements in the South?
Specifically right now, there's been a tremendous effort during this election cycle to fund and support the base building of community-based organizations, Black-led, women-led organizations, to make sure that we are working with our Latinx and API communities. And so it's been tremendous to see folks invest resource in the organizations and have those dollars come down in a way that allows organizations the autonomy to create their own program, and the understanding that I don't know if it's because of the uprising or it's because of the pandemic, but there seems to be a moment happening. There's a real shift happening where people are listening to the ground and they are taking the leadership of the ground into consideration when they build program. And that's a beautiful thing. I am so impressed with the work that we've seen from all of our partners across the spectrum, whether it's at the C3 spaces or the C4 spaces. Everyone is doing the best work I've seen in quite some time. And it feels very genuine and authentic. And so I just hope it continues because it's going to take a multi-decade strategy. We didn't get into the situation overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. So it's going to take a multi-decade strategy to work with our partners to make some real change. And that's exciting.
Thanks, John. So I want to remind folks again who are watching that you can add your questions to the chat. You can also post in the comments. So feel free to add any questions you might have. So in thinking of where we are and kind of the impact that these election results are going to have, how do we think about strategy? You talked about multi-decade strategy, multiracial, multi-generational coalitions. Can you talk a little bit more about strategy and kind of how that came together for you all?
Yes, one of the things that's really interesting is that there's a collaborative effort between the labor unions, the progressive non-governmental organizations, and some public entities, that care enough about what's happening on the ground and that are just frustrated with the last 4 years of governance. And they made some decisions about listening to one another and about sitting down at the table together to come up with some strategic ways to move program. And so we talked about the base building, but another part of this was data and information sharing. It was coordinating, legally, of course, to make sure that folks were not covering the same doors at the same time. It was figuring out messaging, not listening to the data from pollsters, quite frankly, and large white-led consultants who have their own blind spots and have their own challenges around racial equity and discriminatory practices. And so the thing we say is if bad data goes in, bad analysis comes out. And so now we're actually seeing the tools of data analysis being done by people of color, by Black folks on the ground. Now we're seeing conversations around the preconceived notions around the 3 contacts to a yes and what it really takes to move Black men or Black women, and the fact that what people thought it took to impact us is absolutely not what it is. We don't really need music and a catchy tune or dance in order to come out and take action. No more so than anyone else. What we need is common sense strategies that move us forward. What we need is solutions to systemic racism and generations of racial inequality. And what we need is a group of someones who will listen to what we're trying to say and take into consideration the voices of the folks who are closest to the harm. As you were saying, Diana, the folks that are closest to the heart should be closest to the work. And that doesn't happen far too often, even in our progressive spaces. And so this coalition that was built, it's built at the speed of trust. It's delicate, but it's meaningful and it's powerful. And so I hope that it continues. I see a long future for us. And it is built on the shoulders of our, brothers and sisters from the SCLC, from the civil rights movement. This is a continuation of SNCC, SNEEJ, CORE, the Southern Organizing Committee for Economic and Social Justice, the NAACP, and others. Like, so many of our elders played a role in the Malcolm X grassroots movement, Southerners on New Ground song, a lot of the historical challenges around inequality, around misogyny, around patriarchy, around who was other and excluded. Those things are being addressed in real time. We have done away with a cancel culture. We are meeting folks where they are. We say you come as you are and you grow as you go. We challenge you to be different. We challenge you to be better. We challenge folks to be transformed through the work. And quite frankly, it's not just about voting. If someone tells me they don't my next question then is, well, what do you do? What organizations are you a part of? Because it's not okay to sit on the sidelines. What are you willing to do to be transformed through the work? Like
Yeah,
that's where
that's
it's
so
at for
important.
us.
I
And
think
I
that's so
watch this
important now.
coalition. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, John.
No, I was just saying I've been watching this coalition grow for over 20 plus years. My God, the leadership we have in this moment is tremendous. I just want to say that every person has put aside ego, they've put aside, their own desires. They are really doing it for the right reasons. I am so proud of the people I get to call friends and organizers.
Yeah, that's really great to hear because I know coalition politics and building coalitions and seeing what are victories for one group versus the other. How do you manage that? How do you work together to ensure everyone's goals and aspirations are met? And that can be very difficult. So we do have a question. The question is, how closely does your organization work with the Georgia Democratic Party and/or National Democratic Party? I'm wondering how supportive they were or weren't of your local organizing efforts.
So we are a C3 organization. Black Male Initiative Georgia is a C3, which means that we are issue based. We do not work with the Democratic Party at all, where the Democratic Party puts out public information for us that we can share. Once it is public, we will do that, stats, data, and other pieces. But we drive a specifically issue-based campaign and organizing structure because we think, regardless of the parties, that there's work that has to be done, and we know that there are stumbling blocks that get in the way when folks talk about party affiliation. I think both parties, we put out surveys, we'll question candidates, and we'll hear back from both of them equally. Or we won't hear back from both of them equally, but we open the door for both parties to engage with us as long as it's an issue-based conversation. But working directly with the party, we don't do.
And we're getting to almost towards the end. So one question is around, what happens next in building this movement for a progressive movement in the South, protecting democracy. We know that the election was stolen from Stacey Abrams. So what are some strategies in terms of thinking, what are some ways that you all are thinking about protecting democracy in Georgia besides the voter work?
So there's a few pieces of this that are critically important. One is the expungement work that we do, making sure that non-felony convictions and records of Black men and women and people of color in our communities are cleared so that they are able to register and vote, number one, to make sure that they are able to apply for jobs, to have gainful employment, to have housing. It's a real barrier to being able to survive. The other thing is that regardless of your party, the system is failing us. Right now, we have 159 counties in Georgia with 159 Board of Election processes. And that's one of the things that was unearthed by Fair Fight and by the work of Stacey Abrams and others, is that the system is rigged and it's just unfair. And I think that the work and the lawsuits and the fight that was done by Abrams and the crew is tremendous. And I think that what comes out of a fair fight process is a new electoral structure, a new fair and unrigged system that allows every person who has the right to vote to cast their ballot. And then I think the other piece is the census, right? The work that Fair Count is doing, the work that Georgia Coalition for People's Agenda and that we're doing with BMI. Now that the census is passed, we have to worry about the redistricting. We have to make sure that that's a fair and equitable process and that residents are heard. We're deeply concerned about what happens to our communities when they draw these districts and they cut us out and they steal our voices. And so it's tremendously important that each of us watch the process of redistricting next year and that we are on top of it. Those are a few of the things that we can do to make some substantive change and make sure that our voices aren't stolen.
Yeah, I think that's really important to uplift that, the census is going to impact what, like you said, the redistricting of a lot of different voting districts and how that negatively impacts communities, Black and Brown communities often. And it's such an important piece that people often don't think about, and how much power is held within that. So, we have 5 more minutes left. So what would be your what do you see for the future? What are some hopes and dreams, but also with the reality that we're dealing with currently, with violent occupations and things like that, and kind of these groups holding on to wanting to hold on to power, and like this fear around this change that's happening. Yeah. So what are your hopes and dreams, and like how do we move forward, and how can we challenge kind of these times?
Right. My first hope and dream is that we all move forward safely and alive. I hope that folks are conscious and thoughtful of how they maneuver through the space, and they recognize that folks with Black and brown skin are not safe right now in this America, and that with folks acting out the way that they are now, we need an increased awareness of our surroundings. We need to be more cautious about how we engage, not just because of the militias, but because of the pandemic. We need folks to stay safe, and until we can find our way forward. Um, my biggest hope is that folks will listen, and they will see that anything is possible if we can strategize, organize, and mobilize. And they take Georgia as a lesson. I saw a few tweets earlier today which said, we hope folks realize that the South was never red, it was suppressed. That the reality is the voters in Georgia are progressive and they care, but that if you steal someone's vote, if you suppress an entire population of people, if you create barriers to voting, if you make it more difficult for individuals to cast their ballot and lift their voice, then of course what comes out is something that looks more constrained and more conservative. It looks like a occupied state. It looks frightening. And so for the first time in a long time, I think people are seeing the South for the beautiful, like, amazing, fun-loving, energetic, and hopeful place that it is. I love the South. I love the South. And I hope folks really understand it's not just Georgia, but it's Florida, it's Alabama, it's Mississippi, it's Louisiana. My biggest hope is that we spread this movement, and that we do the same thing in those other southern states, in Texas, that we did here in Georgia, that we listen to the leadership on the ground, that we ask them how we can be supportive of them, and that we give them our resource and our love in a way that allows them to reach their highest potential. And the last thing I'll say about this is I hope folks really understand that making Georgia more progressive is a moment. It is not solidified yet. It is not done. You cannot pack up your bags and your resources and go home. Now is the time you need to double and triple down. Now is the time you need to invest more. Now is the time we need to fight harder, because proof that we could win is proof of concept. Being able to hold the victory is proof of change. So I'm hoping that we really see some proof of change in this country.
Thank you, John, for leaving us with those very powerful words. And that really resonates with me. And, your hopes also really resonate with me. And, we have to keep fighting. We have to keep pushing forward, and we have to keep supporting and giving the resources to continue doing this work and sustaining the change that we want to see. So thank you again to John for joining us this evening. To our audience members, thank you for participating. Thanks for joining us as well. Thanks for your questions. Again, you can join us every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to check out more of our interviews. Also, go ahead and like and subscribe to our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and we'll see you next time.